Welcome to Anthropology 127. I'm Tom McGovern. I'm going to be presenting you lectures, and most of them are going to be recorded like this because I'm having some bandwidth problems where I live. So I'll try to pop up some discussions, but meanwhile, I hope you enjoy this recorded presentation. Okay, this is our first class, and in this class, I'm going to be talking to you a bit about disciplinary history. Where did archaeology come from? How did archaeology as a way of understanding the past and of reality generally come from? Because it's not obvious. Let's have a look. So what's archaeology? Well, ultimately it's layers of artifacts in the dirt and objects. And let's take a look at some of the basic concepts of history here. Just to let you know, most of these slides actually have fairly extensive notes on them. So if you want to go to the PowerPoint archive, which is going to be on Blackboard, and have a look at the presentation there. You'll see there's some more notes that I won't talk about entirely as we go forward here. Okay, archaeology is definitionally the study of the human past using material remains, things left behind by people, artifacts and contexts, sites and settlement patterns, environmental impacts, the creation of cultural landscapes. Archaeology goes from deep time, earliest artifacts and sites, something like 2.5 million years ago, down to the recent past. There is an archaeology of World War I and archaeology of World War II, and right down to the present, as we'll see people study modern disposal patterns. So, good question for someone who's managing a park. When do you just tidy up the litter, the refuse? And when is that refuse archaeology that has to be recorded and curated? And as we'll see, those are not just trivial questions. Okay, so archaeology is global in scope, but it still has a somewhat uneven research distribution. In some parts of the world, there's still better research than others. It doesn't rely upon documents or living informants, though these are always useful. Different research potentials and problems are present at different times and places. As you'll see, the problems of deep time versus shallow time affect all of us. Okay, thinking about material remains, these are things we leave behind. And you can see in this slide, that's King Tut's mask, Tutankhamun, from the 18th dynasty. And this is a beautiful piece of incredible craftsmanship, which had tremendous meaning for the people who made it. The religious specialists and elites certainly consulted with the craftspeople who made this thing. And then it was buried on the face of the boy king and was not seen again for thousands of years in the 1920s. So it's a special kind of artifact, and it's unique. There's only one of these. Then in the middle, you can see this is a slide of the great Cambodian city of Angkor Wat. This is just one of a whole complex of temples and palaces that stretch over miles. And indeed, we're finding more and more of this every day. This is also a very conscious product of the human mind. There's lots of concern for orientation, according to the stars, the moon. This is just full of religious and elite symbolism. And this, of course, was also the product of highly skilled craftspeople working for a long time. And in this case, lots and lots of labor. And this, unlike King Tut's mask, was a very public statement about the power and authority of the people who lived here. This is a place of drama where religious ritual was acted out in public. So again, it's an artifact, it's material culture. I think you can see it's a bit different from King Tut's mask too. Then down to the lower left there, which you see is an archaeological excavation where they cleared off the turf and the soil, and they've exposed the circular post holes ring of a Mandan Native American Indian site in the upper Mississippi Valley. And this, you can see, was a fairly lightly built structure, and it had a number of storage pits. Those are the dark or outlines that you see around it. This was only occupied probably for one summer and for one winter, and then abandoned forever. So this was a place where people lived and raised their kids, hunted for buffalo, and moved on. This site also is discovered as part of a rescue project for a whole landscape which is going to go underwater, and in fact it's gone now. The site no longer exists. The only record we have of it is its photograph and the drawings made by the excavators. And finally, you have down in the lower right corner a pile of broken potsherds. These are fragments of pottery, and you can see they've all been carefully labeled and numbered. These are important for archaeologists, even though they were probably not very important to the people that made and used these objects. When they broke a pot, it wasn't worth much. They'd throw it away without thinking very much about it. It certainly didn't have the same significance for the users and the makers that King Tut's mask or Uncle Wat had, or even the utility that a nice snug Mandan Wikiup had in the 18th century. However, this is the kind of mature culture, which, as you'll see, is very important for archaeologists. We have a lot of uses for potsherds. Okay, so what kinds of questions do archaeologists address? Well, traditionally, we have taken a look at three big evolutionary questions: the origin of human behavior back in the Pleistocene, billions of years ago; the origin and spread of agriculture about 10,000 years ago; and in some parts of the world, the rise of the state-level civilizations just a few thousand years. So these are major transitions in human experience, and they're only available, only studyable by archaeology. So these are big evolutionary questions which people have been wrestling with for quite some time, and we still are. Other kinds of things which we're doing is looking at the history of human health and disease, the experience of individuals' human lives in the past. You can see this jumble of skeletons here of humans, a horse, and a dog, all of whom were victims in a massacre in a Neolithic village, which was seemingly wiped out sometime about 3,500 BC. Sadly, violence was a feature of human existence for a long time as well. Next to it, there's some teeth from a skeleton from Roman Sirmium in what's now Serbia. And you can see here those horizontal lines pointed out by the arrows across the teeth. And these are developmental defects. These are called enamel hypoplasias. This happens when the body, as you're growing, is attacked by either disease or famine or both. And to protect itself, it shuts down growth. And this shows that this individual had at least three major episodes of this kind of stress during the time they were growing up. Now, they survived them, so they may have had a hard life, but that's not what killed them. In the top there, top right, you can see a vertebral column, at least part of it, and it looks squished. It is. It's crushed. This is a result of a human skeleton being asked to bear unbearable burdens for long periods of time. This particular piece of skeleton comes from a mass grave in what's now northern Greece, of people we think were enslaved people brought from all over Asia by Alexander the Great's conquest. And these people were quite literally worked to death. And this is what it looks like. Similar kinds of skeletal damage is also present on the bodies of enslaved Africans in the world as well. So again, the story of individual experience of life in the past, often harsh. Another big story, of course, is human impact more broadly across the world. One big question, of course, is the Anthropocene, when humans begin to take over the world and shape it to our own satisfaction, change things we didn't expect to change. So one question is, when does that start? Is that something which goes all the way back to the Pleistocene, Holocene? This is when humans spread from Africa and Europe into Australia, into the New World. And this graphic shows you indications of estimates of how much humans had to do with waves of extinction that happened into the Pleistocene. We'll come back and talk about this later. The big set of questions for archaeology today is this issue: when does the Anthropocene start? When does human impact really begin to dominate the globe? Another major concern for modern archaeologists is issues of social inequality. Subaltern groups, people who are not the elite, people who are not the rich, or often not the literate, often leave few or no written records. So even in times and periods where we have lots of documentary sources, there may not be a whole lot written by and for the subalterns. So indigenous communities are often denied history, identity, rights. So there's a need to have archaeology redress some of this balance, provide a more balanced understanding of the past shared by all kinds of people, not just the rich and literate. There's another thing to think about here as well. Archaeology and empire had historic links, which we'll talk about today. And we have, as archaeologists, a major responsibility to decolonialize present archaeology, moving to engage and involve indigenous people, indeed create people as archaeologists who are Native Americans, Native Australians, broaden the discipline, moving to co-production knowledge rather than us telling them about their past. And you learn a lot that way too. We'll talk about some of that later in the course as well. There's also impact on policy, public and private. William Maskey, shown here in a big pile of trash in what's now New Jersey, realized he's led a project, a garbology project, still going on, funded now by different federal agencies interested in tracking what people actually consume versus what they say they do. So the Garbology project demonstrated that archaeology turns out to be a pretty good way of finding out about human behavior, even right now in the present, where you would think everything is documented with YouTube and barcodes. It's not. So this is, again, something about archaeology, which is a way of knowing, which is different from other ways of knowing. Okay, so where do you find archaeology if you're looking for archaeologists? Well, in academic departments in North America and a few other places, archaeology is part of anthropology, just as it is here at Hunter College. So we're one of the 4 fields of anthropology here. In most of the rest of the world, in Europe, Asia, Africa, prehistoric archaeology is often standalone in its own department, or in some places paired with history or tied to a museum. Classical archaeology, the archaeology of Greece and Rome, and sometimes ancient Near East, and sometimes the Islamic period, is sometimes part of a classics department as a hunter, or sometimes connected to art history department. One of the questions, of course, we have is archaeology a science? And that's a bit of a trick question.
How'd it go?